All right, we are back. Another edition of Kevin's Corner. And honestly, unless something crazy happens, I think this might be the last one until the Colts report to training camp coming up a week from Tuesday. We are recording this on Friday, July 14th. Going to be out next week, so I want to get you guys a podcast, an annual one. We do every single July. It's usually the final podcast before training camp begins in some capacity, and that is our most indispensable Colts. So we had the focus on Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman's contract earlier in the week. We will do the most indispensable game today. And back with us this week for a second time, outstanding as expected earlier in the week, he is Mark Dykton. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be back.
Great to have you back, so thank you for that. Along with that, when Jim Irsay speaks, we usually have to listen, and by listening, you really have to listen because you've got to sift through. Feel free, Mark, to fill me in on anything else I missed from Irsay this week. We had Alien Talk. We had Lolita the Whale. A lot of updates on Lolita. Trips to Mars. Certainly music. What else did I miss from Irsay?
The Jim Irsay Collection Tour. Yeah, that was going on.
Boston bound tonight, I think, actually. So, yeah, Irsay's on with McAfee for a half hour earlier this week. And
28 minutes and 30 seconds of it was non-football talk.
Correct. But that 90 seconds, though, he did offer a couple of things I think that are worth noting. So we're going to hit off that right here at the beginning. And, again, we'll get into the most indispensable and do our Twitter questions. Mark, let's start with the Anthony Richardson side of the Irsay comments. And I don't say this, I don't know if I say it often with Irsay, but every time Irsay has spoken about Richardson in relation to him needing to play early, I have found myself nodding my head this offseason. And I did that again on Tuesday or Monday, whenever that day was that he went on with McAfee. This is the quote from Irsay about Anthony Richardson. For Anthony Richardson, we know it's going to be tough, but he has to play to get better. I mean, there's no question. Gardner could come out and play better early on, him just being a veteran, but we have to get Anthony on the field. That is Shane's call when he decides to do it. Mark, your reaction to that comment?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, the NFL has become where rookies usually sat their first year, or you kind of slowly ease them into the playbook. Now it's like you need to figure out with how much money these guys are commanding on their second contracts, you need to figure out if this guy can play or not. And so I can't agree more that he needs to get the reps as soon as possible. You need to take the good with the bad. You need to go with the rookie struggles, the highs and the lows. You need to go through all of that with him, see what you've got. You spent the 4th overall pick on him. I don't think we're fooling anybody in saying that the Colts are probably not going to make the playoffs this year. It's probably not going to be the prettiest record when it's all said and done. So you need to take anything you can get out of Anthony Richardson and look towards 2024 next year and build off of whatever you get out of 2023.
You know, one thing I want to pull out of that quote, when he talks about Gardner Minshew, Gardner could come out and play better early on, him just being a veteran. I don't think anyone is denying that thought. I think that is a 100%, very close to 100% true fact. But I think when the Colts, when they make the decision on Richardson and when to hand him the keys, that aspect cannot even be debated about. Like that can't be a factor. That shouldn't be a factor. No. It has got to be, the sole focus has got to be strictly based on Richardson. You cannot sit there and, all of a sudden, whatever, and I'm just throwing out names. Jim Bob Cooter chirps up from the corner and is like, guys, I think we can win 7 games with Gardner Minshew. I think we can only win 5 with Anthony. My response would be, who the hell cares?
Yeah.
Who the hell cares?
Give me the 5.
Give me the 5 and give me the on-field development. So that factor cannot be alive and well when you are debating this. I know some people have mentioned, and this might be what ends up happening. Like, hey, use Richardson in kind of those, package of plays early on. That puts him into settings where he's comfortable. I want to put him into settings where he's uncomfortable. Like when he is at his best, it is in, kind of the dual threat nature and some of the short yardage stuff, red zone stuff of, getting some legs on the field. I don't think that is enough. And maybe early on that needs to be enough. Maybe that's the route the Colts will go. But again, I want to see what do you look like in 2 minutes? What do you look like throwing the football in an NFL setting? How do you bounce back from good and bad within a game? How do you handle fourth quarter moments? How do you handle the end of a first half?
Yeah, I don't want to see on one play, off the next, like you're not getting any kind of, repetition or anything like that where here's a package for you. Okay, now we're on third down. We're going to put Gardner back in. Yeah. I don't want to see that.
That's not real football.
No.
So that is what I want to see. I know you guys have heard me say this 1,000 times, but again, in all caps, this year is about one thing, and that is the development of the prize. Like anything and everything. You've taken a guy that is unlike really any prospect this league has seen. You've got to develop him as best you can.
The fan base is starving for a franchise quarterback. We've gone through the valley for long enough. It's time for this team to rip the Band-Aid off. They finally did. Now you got to see what this guy can do. Let it rip.
Well, and to that point, Mark, before we move on to the Jonathan Taylor, Shaquille Leonard injury updates from Irsay, to that point, you have chosen to go down this path. Now you need to stay down the path and give yourself the best opportunity to continue to stay down that path. And by that, it means internal development of Richardson, of course, and then support. And those are the two things that now have got to be there. You have swung the bat. You could make the argument you've done the hard part just from a decision making, because there are franchises, and the Colts were certainly one of them over recent years. They weren't willing to swing it. Now they've swung it. Now it's what can you do to move around the bases with that guy. Okay, the other thing that was very late in the McAfee interview, it almost felt like at this point McAfee was like, "Oh boy, we are over time today. We need Jim to kind of wrap things up here."
McAfee rarely gives the rap signal, and he was giving the rap signal. We need to get this going.
He was. And McAfee's body language, boy, tells you pretty much how I think every Colts fan reacted to the soundbite. Irsay at the end and talking about this upcoming season, just out of the blue. It's not like McAfee asked him for specific injury updates. He was like, yeah, Jonathan Taylor is healed up. And then on Shaq Leonard, the quote was, he's working hard. We'll see. He has a chance. He's working really hard. He's getting a little bit better every day.
Yeah, not too optimistic, I would say.
McAfee's body language is like, what did you just say? Because obviously it sounds a whole lot different than Taylor. Now, I think the quote that we have to decipher here, or the pulling out kind of the individual sentence out of the entire quote was, what does he mean by he has a chance? Does he mean he has a chance to play this season? Does he mean he has a chance to be ready for week 1? Does it mean he has a chance to be ready for the first day of camp, which is now 10 days away? That is kind of the unknown in this. I tend to think it's not like he has a chance to play football ever again. I might be in the minority of that. I think I'm pretty realistic with injury situations here, and I can probably separate the two things. I think Irsay is asking that aloud and saying, does he have a chance to be ready for day 1 of camp? I'm not sitting here willing to bet any amount of money that Shaquille Leonard would be out there to start training camp. And I think where I'm at with Leonard is this. Until I see him practice for multiple weeks in a row, I consider his presence on the football field in 2023 a bonus, and I think EJ Speed should be viewed as a starter. That's just, I have to see him out there for several weeks. And Mark, I would make the argument I probably need to see him in a couple of games.
Yeah.
Because when we saw him in games last year, it did not look good, and that is putting it nicely. And so that is where I'm at with this. And, I also probably reacted to these two quotes from Irsay in, maybe a different way than others. At this point, Michael Pittman's hip and Jonathan Taylor's ankle, injury updates on those two guys, they mean more to me than Shaquille Leonard and his back.
Uh-huh.
It just, Leonard's a little bit of cherry on top at this point with where you're at. And trust me, I get the intrigue. He's a rare talent. When he's been healthy, he's been an all-pro. He's a side of the building guy. You love the energy that he plays with, all of those things. But given the nature of your football team and the support you need for Richardson and just how Leonard's injury situation has been, which is beyond murky, beyond cloudy, Taylor and Pittman matter more to me than Shaquille Leonard right now.
Yeah, I took Jim Irsay's comments, and when I heard the "and we'll see," my brain immediately went to maybe week 1 of the NFL season. I think we're completely eliminating training camp. I think we're completely eliminating the preseason. You are maybe going to be ready for week 1, and even that, I think that would be pretty shocking if he suits up in week 1, just given what we know and the lack of what we've heard of any kind of updates. I mean, like you said, Irsay, well, he's trying hard. Well, trying hard makes it seem like there's either setbacks or it's not going according to plan. We're not hearing like he's 100%, he's revved up, he's ready to go. We're not hearing any of that. So my brain immediately goes week 1 of the regular season. We'll see what happens. But like you said, I can't really. We're doing the indispensable Colts. I'm giving a little spoiler here. Shaq Leonard's not on there because we just don't know what his status for 2023 is going to be. And like you said, is he going to play football beyond that? We hope so. We hope so, but I can't put any stock in Shaq Leonard heading into 2023. Whatever we get out of him is going to be a bonus because that's all it is. It's a complete unknown.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, he's nowhere to be found on my indispensable list. And it's a combination of things. It's a combination of, again, how difficult the injury has been to gauge over the last 13 or 14 months. When you think about last year, I think we lose sight of the timeline a little bit with Leonard from last year. He had that first back surgery in June. I mean, Mark, you follow the NFL very closely. Mm-hmm. If you go through an NFL season and you play through something and you need to have a surgical procedure on it after the season, it gets done in January or February or maybe March. Jonathan Taylor's ankle, for example, that got done in the first few weeks after the Colts season ended. You take care of that early in the calendar year, so by the time you get to training camp, you are fully healed and, maybe you've participated a little bit in the spring, maybe not, but certainly during training camp, you're ready to go. Well, look at it last year with Leonard. They didn't even, and I say properly diagnose it in quotes, until June. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden he's got the first back surgery, and then, 4 or 5 months later, Jeff Saturday walks in and sees the first practice with the Colts, and he's like, dude, Leonard, you look like a liability. You need another one. And, when there's nerve issues and, Saturday, used kind of his own examples, and, Shaquille was very, very complimentary of Jeff Saturday and kind of almost forcing him down this path because he knew he needed someone else to kind of tell him that. And now here we are, obviously in July, and there still is an unknown on that front there. So yeah, that pretty much covered the big Irsay stuff. He did sneak in there. He mentioned one time to Anthony Richardson in relation to the game in Frankfurt, Germany against the Patriots. He said, how about going up against Belichick in Germany? So clearly if Jim Irsay is running the operation, Mark Dykton, Anthony Richardson will be out there and could be out there very, very early, and we'll get more into all of that coming up here when camp opens up in about 10 days. Unless you got anything else to add, let's get into our most indispensable.
Let's do it.
Okay, again, most indispensable Colts. And Mark, we have done this exercise before on our show. I've done it annually on the podcast for years now. These are the guys that you would label as you cannot afford to lose. So these are your most important players. You can define, how you get to that importance in a multitude of ways. Let's go 5-1, and then at the end, I think we'll get into maybe a discussion on if there are any others that potentially cracked your list. Mark, throw us number 5, your 5th most indispensable Colt.
My number 5 is on the defensive side, Zaire Franklin. I really like what Zaire Franklin does. I think given the status or lack thereof of Shaq Leonard, puts even more onus on Zaire Franklin to have a very good year. You also have EJ Speed, but that linebacker crew is a bit thin for me. But Zaire Franklin is easily the best linebacker, in my opinion, on that staff as of now. And I think after that, like I said, Grant Stewart, Cameron McGrone, JoJo Doman. I mean, it's a crew. Let's say that. Zaire Franklin is my number 5 because I think if you lose him, boy, that linebacker crew looks really, really thin.
Franklin, honestly, if I would have stretched it to a 6th, I think he would have been number 6 for me. So you and I have a very similar line of thinking with this. The importance has risen, certainly with the departure of Bobby Okereke and when you factor in the lingering health of Leonard. So I had him just off the top 5. My number 5 was Jonathan Taylor. I think there's always the question when you put a running back like this on the list of he plays running back. And it's somewhat easy to replace that position. It's certainly easier to replace that position than others. But I have him 5 here. He is a great, great talent. There's no denying that. Obviously, he brings home run ability to that sort of position. And for a team that's lacking frontline skill talent, Taylor's coveted, even if Zach Moss, ran for 100 yards to end last season. So I had Taylor number 5.
Well, I will piggyback off that if you're done because he's my number 4.
All right.
Jonathan Taylor's my number 4. You take Jonathan Taylor off the Colts offense the last year or two. Boy, that was a tough watch to begin with. I can't imagine what it would have looked like if he was not on there. And then I think also you're going to have Anthony Richardson, a rookie. He's kind of the safety valve for him. He's kind of his guy that if things go south, just hand it off to Jonathan Taylor and let him do the job. So he's my number 4. If you lose him, you have Zach Moss and a couple other guys, but boy, I mean, and then he's got the contract coming up, so you'd have to imagine he's going to want to prove himself and make sure, like, hey, you're going to be paying me, Colts, whether you want to or not, otherwise someone else will. He is my number 4.
Okay, my number 4 is also a skill player, and that would be Michael Pittman. The reason that I have Pittman ahead of Taylor comes from, again, I think it's easier to replace a top wideout than a top running back. Plus, assuming Anthony Richardson plays the majority of the season, I would think you would rather have your top pass catcher for that young QB, particularly when that is the question mark for him, in Richardson's case, as an individual player. I think when you look at the names in my top 5, pretty much all of them have Pro Bowl status. Obviously Pittman does not have that, but again, he is playing the position that you could make the argument matters the most for a young QB. So you want Alec Pierce to develop more. You want Josh Downs to make an early impact as that slot wideout. But Pittman is the guy out of those 2 that have certainly been there and done it at some consistent level here in the NFL. So despite all the recent quarterback issues, he's still been pretty steady for you, whoever is under center. I think Michael Pittman slots in for me at 4. And, for the most part, I didn't have like a ton of debate here. I wanted to make sure Pittman and Taylor were in the top 5, but I thought Pittman at 4 checked out for me.
Michael Pittman would, like Isaiah Franklin for your list, he would have been my 6th. He's right there for me, but he did not make the list. I think especially same thing with contracts. With Jonathan Taylor, he's going to want to prove himself that he is a legit number 1 wide receiver. He's been somewhat hampered production-wise with just the lack of quarterback talent that the Colts have provided him in his career so far. I'll be very interested to see what he does with Anthony Richardson and all that. But he had 99 catches and didn't crack 1,000 yards last year. Again, that's a product of the quarterback situation, but it also shows the lack of being able to stretch the field. I would like to see him stretch the field a bit more. I think his long wide receiver reception last year was like 28 yards or something, which was...
Yeah, you want some more big plays.
Yeah, I would like some more big plays out of Michael Pittman Jr.
Interesting. I'm curious if we differ on any of these top 3 now. I'll go off number 3 here, and in a way, I was kind of like, man, am I really doing this? But this is so much due to the depth chart. It's so much due to the players around him at this position. I have called him, and I think it's accurate. I thought he was your most disappointing Colt of last season. But having said that, I think he is very indispensable looking into this year, and that would be Kenny Moore.
If we were in the studio, I'd go ding, ding, ding. Kenny Moore is my number 3. Yes.
Look at this. Mark Dykton and I here. Yeah, and again, Mark, I should say 2 things. One, it has to do with so much of the inexperience around him. Like, if you take Moore out of that room, literally Dallas Flowers is the only returner, and Dallas Flowers hadn't played a defensive snap until the final month of last season. And then the second part would be, you drafted 3 corners. You drafted 3 outside corners. It's not like you drafted who you think is going to replace Kenny Moore at some point down the road. So when you get into kind of the intricacies of the quarterback position, again, he looks to be kind of your only real slot guy. Is it Tony Brown in a pinch if you need him? Is it Julian Blackmon sliding over from safety? I don't know how you would handle that, but I mean, this is a big time need from a versatility slot standpoint, but again, also strictly from an experience standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, the Isaiah Rodgers suspension and obviously release has completely torn apart this depth chart for corner for the Colts. Kenny Moore, like you said, was the most disappointing Colt last year. People are asking if he's going to get traded and all that stuff. He needs a big bounce back year, I think, not only just for the Colts, but for himself as well and all that. And to help this this position because you look around, it's Dallas Flowers. It's Nick Cross, which he was on my indispensable list last year. I don't know what we have in Nick Cross right now. Tony Brown, all that stuff. You have to try to figure out what you've got at cornerback. Can he be a building block? Can he be a future piece with the Colts, or is he going to be a future trade block piece going forward? I need to see a lot from Kenny Moore after last season. The Isaiah Rodgers suspension and release has elevated him to both of our number 3s on this slot, which I don't think I would have. If Isaiah Rodgers was still on the field, I don't know if he cracks my top 5. But because of that and the lack of depth behind it, he's number 3.
Yeah, Gilmore, obviously Rodgers, a little bit of Brandon Faison. You have lost a ton, and I also do a most pressure, you call it, or most approve list as well. Certainly Kenny Moore would be on that list given all the things that have happened off the field, with him contractually. And like you mentioned, Mark, he is now in a contract year. So Kenny Moore at number 3. Mark, give us your number 2.
All right, number 2. I don't think he was on my list last year. He gave us a fantastic sound drop for our show, and he plays at one of the premium positions that the Colts desperately need to find an answer for. We're hoping he's the one. Bernhard Raimann. He is my number 2.
I'll be back, Bernhard Raimann said to us on the morning show.
Left tackle heading into last season was a joke that they were. The way the Colts handled left tackle last year, it still ticks me off because everyone could see it except for them, apparently. They're like, oh, don't worry about it. We got it covered in camp, and you and the rest of the reporters out there were like, this doesn't look so good. And sure enough, it was a disaster. Bernhard Raimann, if he can shore up that left tackle position, boy, would Colts fans love him even more than they don't already. He needs to take a big step. I'm hoping he does. Anthony Richardson, for the love of God, needs to have his backside protected as well. I would really like to see Bernhard Raimann step it up. If he falls out, God forbid, I mean, the left tackle behind him, Blake Freeland, Carter O'Donnell, I shudder to think what will happen at left tackle if Bernhard Raimann doesn't work out.
Yeah, it's a great argument. I did not have Raimann in my top 5. I basically kind of had 3 that I thought about in my top 5 that I did not put in there. I mentioned Zaire Franklin earlier. Raimann was certainly one of them, and I thought you laid it out there really, really well. Number 2 for me was DeForest Buckner. And, depth at defensive tackle, I don't think is like dire. I think you certainly have some questions about that group. You have some bodies you could turn to. But the thing that makes Buckner so unique for me, Mark, is he plays a position that continues to rise in importance. I think we see that around the league of how quarterbacks don't love when, interior guys can disrupt the pocket like some of these guys can do. But Buckner is just a rare commodity in that he is a 3-down defensive tackle. He gives you presence on all 3 of those downs. He's durable, and the guy just doesn't seem to get winded. I mean, he is a rare defensive tackle that can play 80, 90% of the snaps in a game, and you don't feel like you're losing a whole lot out of him over the course of that game. And then you factor in, okay, is the edge rush group still going to be, kind of quiet from an individual presence? Are you lacking playmaking at linebacker still? Obviously, in the secondary, are you lacking playmaking? You got to turn somewhere, and I do feel like Buckner can provide some of that for you. So, DeForest Buckner, Marcus, who I had number 2.
I think he's also the NFL is quickly, obviously, going towards more edge rushers, whereas the pass rush is where the pass rush starts. DeForest Buckner is where the Colts pass rush starts and ends because Kwity Paye and Dio, I would still say, are kind of big question marks on either edge. And so DeForest Buckner is their pass rush. And, he's known around the league and all that stuff. But, yeah, if he's not going, that's a lot more pressure on the edge guys. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Okay, so now I'm curious who you have at 1 here.
Well, I would say number 1, and again, this is indispensable. Again, we've already stated that we don't think the Colts are going to make playoffs. At least I don't. Maybe you've drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. I have not. I don't think they're.
No. I'm not.
I don't think we have any postseason aspirations. I don't think we're looking for the division this year. With that said, the guy who the Colts spent the 4th overall pick on is my indispensable because
interesting.
While we are not looking for playoffs, My God, we need a shot in the arm as far as excitement in this town with football. And if Anthony Richardson can provide that under center, I don't care if he throws 20 interceptions or gets sacked a record high or anything like that. If you're seeing some spark from this guy under center, then the fan base is going to fall in love with him. They're going to get some faith going. They're going to get excited for the future. I understand they have Gardner Minshew. I pushed for Gardner Minshew to get signed here because he was in Shane Steichen's offense in Philadelphia. With that said, if Gardner Minshew's under center, I mean, it's going to be like Matt Ryan 2.0 again, where I like what Gardner Minshew does. He's better than Matt Ryan is at this point of his career. But the fan base and interest is just going to completely fall off a cliff. So I think Anthony Richardson, if healthy, can be a lightning rod for this team as far as
next era.
Yeah, the next era. We get out of the doldrums of the Colts quarterback room, time. And we finally move into maybe getting some more primetime games and some more national interest on the Colts. I have to have Anthony Richardson as my number one.
Interesting.
I'm curious if he's not there, who's your number one?
Yeah, so I did not have him there. Again, when I view this, and I certainly see why, Mark, you would go there. And again, you can define most indispensable how you would like. I lived in more of a short-term view, and I lived more in like the 2023 view to it. The guy that I had number one falls in line with who you had at number two. And I've got Braden Smith at number one. I probably will raise my hand. I have had Anthony Costanzo number one on this list probably for 2 to 3 years. I had him at the top of this list. So I've always been a proponent of an offensive tackle very, very high. And the reason I have Braden Smith at one, I think, is very similar to why you have Bernhard Raimann at two, in that you look at the depth at tackle. And I saw it. I think it was the first week of OTAs we were out there watching. Braden Smith was out, and he was only out for a week. But the starting tackle pair in that practice was Bernhard Raimann at left tackle and Blake Freeland at right tackle. So in Bernhard Raimann, you have a second-year starting tackle who had never played tackle in a football setting until 3 years ago at Central Michigan. And then in Blake Freeland's case, you have a day 3 pick starting at right tackle. I mean, that is, if that were to happen, there's no way, and I guess one injury would obviously play into it, but I can't imagine many times in the history of the Colts they have ever started a rookie tackle and a second-year tackle, and it's not like either of them were top 10 picks, or hell, top 50 picks. Raimann was, in the 70s, and then, Freeland was in the hundreds when you get into round 4. So that's why I decided to put Smith. I think offensive tackle in general is very important, particularly when you have a rookie quarterback. I thought it was really important for me to put an offensive lineman somewhere on this list, especially an offensive tackle. So that's why I put Braden Smith at 1. And again, Mark, I'm living in more of the here and now present moment of 2023 and not necessarily the long-term view of it. Just because that's how I've normally operated with creating such a list. I think it's pretty well documented what I think of this season and how it needs to be viewed in light of Anthony Richardson first and foremost. But I went with Braden Smith there at 1.
Yeah, and I would clarify that because Anthony Richardson is my number 1. Again, I'm not expecting more wins because he's under center. The wins don't matter as far as this season's concerned for me. But if, for God forbid, if he gets injured and you don't get to see him on the field, and there's a complete unknown heading into 2024 again at quarterback, I think that's just going to amp up the pressure and all that stuff. So that's why if he gets injured and he's not on the field, he can't perform, and you just don't know what you have in him, boy, 2024 would be really interesting, I think, for the Colts.
Definitely makes sense. I mean, I've kind of said this before with the Pacers and Colts over recent years. Like, there was a time with the Pacers where I was like, the biggest question of the season is not whether you make the playoffs or not. It is Sabonis and Turner the pairing you want moving forward? With the Colts leading into the Carson Wentz season, it was, is Carson Wentz the answer or not? Because, those seasons then define the next kind of 5 to 10 years when you're not the Chiefs or the Bills or the Eagles or whoever walking into this season in 2023, where there is so much, understandably, hope about what can happen just this season. Mark, other names you thought about? I mentioned Zaire Franklin. I mentioned Bernhard Raimann. I will throw Quentin Nelson in there. I think anytime you are one of the best players at your position in the league, if not the best, you are in the indispensable category. And it's not like the Colts have a lot of proven depth at guard either. Now,
Right.
It is a guard. That's why I don't put him in the top 5. So those were some of the other names. Anybody else that you had?
We mentioned Michael Pittman was one that didn't make my list. He was just outside. Ryan Kelly, he was almost there because I think there's just such a great
center
unknown.
for a quarterback.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I mean, Ryan Kelly, I mean, we debated most of the offseason, like, is he going to still play football? We didn't know if he could, he had obviously a horrible tragedy personally go on, but I mean, his play dropped off significantly, and I need to see what he can do heading into 2023. He was another one I considered putting on there, and one of the edge rushers, whether it was Kwity Paye or Deo and Idango.
So you had them over Buckner.
Yeah, just because I feel like while you don't want to lose DeForest Buckner, you know what you're getting in him. And I also kind of view Indispensable as guys that kind of had unproven potential. Like what are you looking to see from them if they were unable to perform to a level that you think is acceptable? Then who are you looking at on the depth chart and all that stuff? So I would think them as well.
Always enjoy that list. It's a fun exercise to do leading into training camp each and every year. So again, just to recap from 5 to 1 for myself, it was Taylor, Pittman, Moore, DeForest Buckner, and Braden Smith. And for Mark Dykton, it was Zaire Franklin, Jonathan Taylor, Kenny Moore, Bernard Ryman, and Anthony Richardson. All right, man, should we hop into...
If Jake was here, it would have been Rigoberto Sanchez would have been on here as well.
Last year, I think Rigo and Danny Pinter,
Yeah.
just above Rigo Sanchez on that end. Should we hop into Twitter questions?
Let's do it.
All right, what do we got for number 1?
All right, Wake Spike, who chimed in on the podcast earlier this week, has said, "Hey guys, Rodgers was due $4 million-ish this year. How much of that contract do you think will wind up going towards Pittman and Taylor's guaranteed money, and how much towards a replacement? Keep up the good work."
Yeah, I thought it was like more in the $2.5 million range with Rodgers, but whatever. That's not a huge difference there. And right now, I think the Colts have well over $20 million. I think more in the 25-ish range in cap space. So, how I look at that is I front load the hell out of these contracts. And again, I think these extensions. I would expect both of these guys to be long-term Colts. Pittman is one that I'm a little bit more curious about potentially playing out deeper into the season, potentially into next offseason. But I don't know if you're throwing around ballparks for it. Is Taylor in that kind of Baker's dozen range, right around 13 a year? Is Pittman just under kind of that 20? Mark did the exercise earlier this week where he read off some of those $20 million wideouts. $20 million doesn't necessarily mean you're all pro. I mean, there are some guys making $20 million at wideout that you could make an argument. Maybe not make the argument, but certainly be like, "Whoa, that guy makes that much money."
Yeah. Well, people raised eyebrows with Christian Kirk's contract
Sure.
with the Jaguars, and I mean that one's worked out so far for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, right now the Colts aren't doing anything at vet corner, for a veteran corner. And again, I'm good with it, but with that cap space, which is again in that $25 million ballpark, I think you are trying to extend one, if not both of them, and again, front load the hell out of it. So you take advantage of Richardson's rookie contract right now, Bernard Ryman's rookie contract, Kwity Paye's rookie contract, with the hope, of course, being down the road, you're paying those guys significant money, and obviously you're looking to support Richardson a little bit more with other guys from free agency or even trade moves.
Yeah, I could see Jonathan Taylor's contract getting done first. I feel like front load it, give more guaranteed money. He's a top 5 back in the NFL, and he'll get his money. Pittman's, I feel like, is kind of more of a wait-and-see approach, like you said, mid-season, next season, off-season. They'll figure it out then. Up next after that was Trevor. If you could add 2 former Colts players in their prime non-quarterback to this current Colts roster, who would you choose?
Okay, one more time on that front. You said 2.
If you could add 2 former Colts players in their prime, non-quarterback, to this current Colts roster, who would you choose?
Well, boy, I think it's... Gosh, I would argue it's pretty obvious. I mean, when I heard that for a second time, 2 just immediately jumped off the page. I guess you could make an argument for Tarek Glenn now that I think about it a little bit more. But the 2 that immediately jumped out to me, Mark, were Marvin Harrison and Dwight Freeney. Just
Boy,
the speed and the stuff.
That's where I was going.
I mean, positional value, the speed and the style of the player. Obviously, you would support Richardson with Marvin. And again, I mean, Marvin, maybe you're complimenting some of the bigger wideouts that you have. I think speed edge rusher is what this team has sorely missed as well. I
wouldn't mind seeing Bob Sanders.
Yeah.
That'd be a number 3
you
for
can
me.
get in some luxury items. I'd kind of label, him as more of in that luxury mold. I think the best argument you can make for another would be Tart Glenn. But to me, I think Freeney and Marvin just stand out above the rest.
Yep. No, I would agree wholeheartedly with both of those guys. Flippin', what do you think about the Colts over 7.5 wins? The schedule is so easy.
Boy, is that the new over under, Mar? I feel like it was more in the 6.5.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to double check while we're doing this because I didn't think 7.5 seems a bit rich for me. I think.
Yeah, to the last part, yes, the schedule on paper is. I think it's fair to say it's easy. Obviously, we'll see how the season plays out. But, I mean, when you list the quarterbacks, especially the quarterbacks coming to Lucas Oil Stadium, it's not a daunting list by any means. And then talk about your road atmospheres. First off, you aren't playing any of these games in primetime on the road. Baltimore and Cincinnati, those hard road, games. Cincinnati fans and Baltimore fans are going to view those games as like, do we even really care about them? So just in the nature of how they appear on your schedule. I don't know. Maybe there's still venom in Baltimore.
I'm looking at a sportsbook app at the moment. It is over under 6.5.
Okay.
That makes a little more sense.
Yeah, I've kept on saying 7 to myself. So 6.5 is a number I would like a lot more than 7.5. And Mark, you are, certainly one that pays attention to this stuff. If you wrote out the lines for Colts games right now, like if you wrote out every single Vegas line for a Colts game this season, I think you could make the argument right now, outside of at Baltimore and at Cincinnati, I think they'd be a 6-point or less underdog in every single game.
Yeah.
I don't know what else jumps out at me as like, guaranteed touchdown underdog. Maybe New England.
Cleveland, maybe?
In Germany.
Cleveland.
Isn't that Cleveland game at home, though?
It's at home, but yeah.
Yeah, again, I mean, to be a touchdown underdog at home, like, you got to be horrific and playing a really good team.
Yeah.
I just don't think you see that a whole lot.
I would agree that nothing stands out. Like, I can make an argument why Cleveland could be that, but I can't say with certainty that for sure at home the Colts would be touchdown underdogs.
You just get in that road schedule, and it's New England and Germany. Baltimore and Cincinnati obviously will be tough on the road. Certainly you have your 3 divisional games. I don't know, maybe at Jacksonville becomes something that kind of falls into that boat, but you just don't have a lot of daunting games away from home.
No,
so.
but if we're talking over 7.5, no thank you. If we're talking over 6.5, okay, I'm interested.
And I hear this a lot from Colts fans. Hell, I hear this a lot from some of my colleagues. Boy, the Colts easily could have won 3 more games last year. Easily could have won 3 more games. And I want to say to them, yes. Do you remember the games the Colts won, though?
Yeah.
They easily could have lost 3 of those games when you think about the play that Gilmore had to make to seal the Denver game, the play that he had to make against Devontae Adams to seal the Raiders game. That Chiefs game, you had 95 things go in your favor, from a muff punt to Kelsey rare drop to weird field goal decisions to lose that game. And still, Mahomes had the ball, driving down the field there at the end. So I thought 4-13-1 or 4-12-1 and whatever it ended up being was a very accurate assessment for this football
Watch the new quarterback show on Netflix. That Colts-Chiefs game is highlighted in episode 1.
Ooh, okay.
Pretty interesting.
Positive moment there.
All right, moving on. Speaking of Patrick Mahomes, Jason says, what would be the maximum trade package of current Colts players you'd be willing to trade for Patrick Mahomes? No draft picks, and your answer can't be all 53. Well, I don't think all 53 would get it done, quite honestly, if the Chiefs are on the other end of that phone call.
Yeah, this is a great July question, isn't it?
I mean,
start listing them.
DeForest Buckner, Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I selfishly, I'd like to try and keep Pittman just to have support if Mahomes was here. I would literally trade Nelson, Buckner, Taylor, all in one trade, and I would.
I don't think the Colts. I mean, the Chiefs.
Right. I'm not saying the Chiefs. I would throw in Kenny Moore. Hell, I'd probably throw in Kwity Paye. I mean, yes, to your point, Mark. The Chiefs would say, I would think they would say no, but I would lose no sleep over trading away Nelson, Buckner, Taylor, Pay, and more.
No, you get the best quarterback, obviously currently, and maybe of all time.
And I'm absorbing what I think is a relatively manageable contract, considering how generational he is.
Yeah, you build around. You have the scraps after that trade, and you build around Patrick Mahomes after that. You'll figure out the rest.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Agreed.
But all right, Tyler. Why does the NFL not have DraftKings/FanDuel have specific accounts for NFL players, and when the location pings at team facilities, it locks the account completely? It's a bad look for the NFL when these players keep getting popped. I would think they would want to eliminate it completely, and I'm sure the technology is out there for something like that. Well, obviously, with being the Indy 500, geolocation, that is the case that they can do that. I don't know how specifically DraftKings and FanDuel can do that for specific accounts, though.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of this. First off, I think it's a really bad look.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know this, Mark, but I'd be willing to bet the biggest partner that DraftKings or FanDuel or whoever has is probably the NFL when you think
Without
about
question.
it. So wouldn't you want to make sure that your partner is satisfied and happy?
Yeah.
And by that, I would just say this. When you are insert Colt player, when you are Bernard Ryman and you sign up for a gambling app, that means that Bernard Ryman's FanDuel account just doesn't have an NFL page. Or if it has an NFL page, he can look at it, but he can't bet on anything. Like you just lock him out of that. It would be like, Mark, one of our kids, tablets or iPads, and saying, here's the adult section and here's the kids section.
Parental controls, basically.
Yes. I thought that, to me, that seems like an obvious thing. And again,
I would say if you're within like a mile and a half of West 56th Street's facility, there should be a block on it.
Geolocate it for sure, but also just remove the NFL because obviously they can't bet on the NFL even if they're at home as well. And I would like to think that, again, the partners would work together on this because it is such an important partnership. And to Tyler's point, it's awful PR for the league. I did want to sneak in, Mark, one comment we had coming out of Monday's show. Remember the PED versus gambling question that we got?
Uh-huh.
I think it was Jimmy reached out and said, he articulated this in a much better way than I know I certainly did on the Monday pod. He goes, there is zero comparison between gambling and performance-enhancing drugs and the type of punishment that should be out there. He said that taking PEDs, that kind of implies the players are still doing everything to try to win. If you're involved in gambling, you may be involved in the team losing.
Right.
Which, again, that gets into kind of the ethical part. I thought that was a good way to put it.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, you might have inside information. Like I'm sure you've seen that story with the baseball coach trying to make the bet at the Reds sports book. Did you see that?
Yes. Oh,
yeah.
That is a wild story, by the way. That's a Mooresville guy.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is, I think it's an SI article. I encourage people to read that.
Texting the coach while at the sports book trying to place the bet.
Yep, and they had cameras zoomed in on it, found the coach's name. Yes. Stupidity. Yeah.
Brian, this is definitely a summer football podcast question.
Felt like we had a few.
What is your go-to foo-foo drink when chilling on the beach with palm trees around? Give me a daiquiri of any kind, please. I'll take one of those.
Okay, and that is a Mark Dykton answer right there?
Yeah, because I would say, if you're relaxing on the beach, you're on vacation, sure, a beer is nice, a whiskey, yes, please. But occasionally you're just like, hey, I will take the fruity drink. I don't care. It's my drink. It's my body. I'm drinking it. Give me some strawberry pineapple or something.
Okay. I totally can hear you out there. I am a pina colada fan, certainly. I could do a Mai Tai as well. For the most part, if I'm down in Florida, anything with a little rum action in it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a big fan of.
We're currently at the Dykton household. Ashley, we got the handle of Malibu rum.
Okay.
And she gets the organic strawberry lemonade from Costco. Woo! That is fantastic.
That sounds like a hell of a weekend night right there.
It's pretty dynamite.
I like that. It's a great question, Brian. But yes, pina colada certainly, which usually is kind of probably satisfies my calorie intake for the day.
Yeah, give me the foo-foo drink. That's fine. You enjoy what you enjoy. How about that?
I love the description. I mean, come on, you're on a beach with palm trees. Not like you need to be slamming IPAs down.
No. All right, Conroy. My last question is more of a personal one. My wife and I are expecting our first child midway through August. And I wanted to know if you had any tips for game day with the newborn. Obviously, screaming at the TV or cheering, hopefully, Might wake up sleeping babies, but I figured you may have some wisdom in this department. Any advice is welcome, to be honest. Looking forward to a baby in blue this fall.
Boy, well, first off, Conroy, congrats to you.
Yes.
Congrats to your wife. I love that it's not like any sort of personal household question. Nothing about diapers,
no,
or bottles, or whatever.
Those will come on the next podcast.
No, this is about how do you get them inside a Lucas Oil Stadium and make them behave to the nth degree. What do you think the name? You think Grover is the name here? Yeah, I mean, got to go Colt player.
Oh yeah,
here.
DeForest maybe.
Yeah, Mark, you could. We have taken, obviously, I'm working game day, so I've not taken Rosie and or Max to a game. We took Rosie and Max to a Butler basketball game back in March. And this ended up coming to fruition. My biggest worry, and again, Mark, have you ever been to Hinkle?
Yes.
So it's kind of a hard place to hide. At Lucas Oil, if you want to, just head out to the concourse. And for the most part, you can get away from the kind of in-game entertainment aspect to it. At Hinkle, I mean, yeah, you have a little bit of that. But my worry was like, all right, how are they going to react to intros when you get a little like pyro feel to it all? The band is kind of loud, the music's loud, sometimes the lights are going off, those sorts of things. So that aspect to the Butler game was a bit loud. And honestly, you can make the argument probably college games are a worse atmosphere for that because, college basketball, because the band and just how loud some of that stuff can be from a in-game music standpoint. So my suggestion would be like during player intros, run out of the tunnel, I would say go to the bathroom with the kid, especially if the kid's going to be this young. But outside of that, I mean, make sure you've got, whatever, bottle and pouch and whatever you need. And I think it's actually doable.
Yeah. I mean,
Do you go earmuffs?
So I would strongly recommend investing in like headphones for sure if they're a newborn. Like newborn, I'm assuming is between like freshly born to like 6 to 9 months.
Well, yeah. I mean, hell, he said the baby's in August. Right?
Yeah. So my wife and I, when you and I did the shrimp cocktail eating contest ahead of the Raiders game, our youngest was probably about 7 months old. And my wife and I have this thing. It's kind of like a baby born, but they're called Tulas or whatever. And the baby just slept in there. Nora was sawing logs the whole time. That we were kind of fortunate in that aspect. But we also had the headphones as well because it does get loud in there, and you don't want their ears hurting or anything like that. We did that. I would also highly recommend, if you're going to Lucas Oil Stadium, go to the guest services booth. They are great over there on game days. They'll provide you with all kinds of stuff. They might help you out with headsets. If you don't have any handy, they can tell you where some rest areas are. They can tell you if the baby needs to get fed. There are feeding stations now, mother stations, I think they're called or whatever, with their private rooms that you can go to there. Talk to the guest services. I want to say they're at 121 is where they're located at. But I used to work with guest services. Those people there are phenomenal. They do a fantastic job. They can also kind of give you some quiet area locations if the baby's acting up. I'd also say if you're going with a newborn or young children in general, don't plan on staying all 4 quarters. I think that would be a luxury. Right. But if they tell you it's time to go, it's time to go because you don't want to have to deal with all that meltdown situation and all that stuff. So I would be mindful of that if you are bringing a newborn or young child there, maybe don't expect to be there all 4 quarters.
Yeah, and again, based off our experience at the Butler game earlier this year, I would say especially like those 10 minutes right before the game starts. I mean, you can make the argument that's like the loudest, most trippy's not the right word, but lights are on and off, and again, pyro, in stadium and loud booms and those sorts of things. I would just head to one of the quiet areas if you can during that point. And then honestly, once the game starts, it's not like it's super, super loud. Certainly after touchdowns, you get a little bit of that, but hey, you can kind of anticipate that and see how Grover, the baby, reacts to it, right? Mm-hmm. Is that all of them?
That is all of them. So our parenting advice came in the last one.
A little bit of everything right there. I feel like we're Dr. Phil on this podcast here. Mark, thank you, man. Thank you for both of these this week.
No problem. My pleasure.
Greatly appreciated that. Eddie Garrison should be back from vacation when we start to get into training camp pods. Again, we will tend to do those kind of around the Colts off days coming up when training camp gets underway. And per usual, it'll be daily content, written video as well. We'll be doing our morning show up from camp whenever those morning practice days, along with report day, coincide. So everybody enjoy what is left of your own summer. I'll be doing the same next week. Everybody have a great weekend, great final week leading into camp, and we'll talk to you soon here on Kevin's Corner.